"It's time you learned the value of money," my father announced coldly, sliding the envelope across his mahogany desk, not even looking at me as he returned to studying the investment portfolio that had always mattered more than his children. "Your sister managed to build a career without draining our resources for her creative pursuits. You've had more than enough support already." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. I was being cut off completely at 26, while holding an acceptance letter to the architectural program I'd fought years to get into. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What my father couldn't possibly know was that in just 3 months, I would be standing in the foyer of their beloved Hampton estate, keys in hand, as the new legal owner of everything they were about to lose. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in my father's study, surrounded by the trappings of old money that had defined the Lancaster family for generations. Original oil paintings in ornate frames, Persian rugs on gleaming hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound first editions that no one ever read. The room practically reeked of privilege, a privilege I was apparently no longer entitled to. "Dad, this is my chance to actually make something of myself," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady as I clutched the acceptance letter from the Paris Architectural Institute. 3 years of rejection letters and portfolio revisions had finally paid off. "It's the most selective program in Europe. Only 12 students worldwide." "Enough, Olivia," my mother interrupted, gliding into the room with her perpetual air of elegant detachment. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than my rent for the past 6 months. "We've supported your dabbling for years now. First it was photography, then interior design, now architecture. Meanwhile, your sister built a respectable law practice without constantly changing direction." Dabbling. The word made my blood boil. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at a design firm while building my portfolio at night. I'd sold my car to pay for specialized software. I'd given up any semblance of a social life. But in the Lancaster family narrative, I would always be the flighty younger daughter who couldn't commit, the disappointment compared to my sister Victoria's unerring path to success. "This isn't dabbling," I insisted, unfolding my acceptance letter with shaking hands. "The selection committee specifically mentioned my innovative approach to sustainable urban housing." "Innovation doesn't pay bills, Olivia," my father cut in, finally looking up from his papers with that familiar expression of mild disappointment that had followed me since childhood. "Victoria was partner at her firm by 27. She has a mortgage, investments, a retirement plan. What do you have to show for yourself? A collection of half-finished projects and a studio apartment in Brooklyn." I swallowed hard. "I have a vision and talent." The admission board said, "The admission board isn't paying your tuition," my mother pointed out, examining her manicure with practiced indifference. "This program costs what, $70,000 per year? For 3 years? That's over $200,000 for another degree you might not even use." The familiar weight of being measured against Victoria settled on my shoulders. My sister, impeccable Victoria with her Harvard law degree, her Connecticut home, her banker husband, and their perfect twin boys who already had Ivy League college funds. Victoria who had followed our father's prescribed path without question. Victoria who had never wanted anything other than what our parents wanted for her? "I'm not asking for the full amount," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "I've saved about 30% of the tuition. I've applied for scholarships. I just need help with—" "No." My father's voice was firm as he slid a single check across the desk. "This is the last money you'll receive from us, Olivia. $20,000. Use it wisely. Pay off your credit cards. Find a more practical career path. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." I stared at the check, feeling a curious mixture of rage and liberation bubbling up inside me. $20,000. The equivalent of what they'd spent on Victoria's wedding flowers alone. "Your sister never needed this de-intervention," my mother added, as if reading my thoughts. She understood responsibility from an early age. Of course she had. Victoria had been groomed for success since childhood. The best private schools, SAT tutors, summer internships arranged through father's connections. Meanwhile, I'd been left to figure things out on my own, my artistic tendencies viewed as a phase I'd eventually outgrow. "You're 26 years old," my father continued, his tone softening slightly. "At some point, you need to join the real world." The real world. As if my world of design studios, midnight rendering sessions, and creative collaboration wasn't real because it didn't involve stock portfolios or billable hours. "I understand," I said finally, picking up the check with a strange sense of calm. "Thank you for your clarity." My father nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "You'll thank us someday, Olivia. Sometimes we need a push to find our true path." If only he knew what that path would look like in just 12 short weeks. As I walked through the grand foyer of my parents' Southampton home for what I assumed would be the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Just heard the news. Call me. I might be able to help." I ignored it. Victoria's help would come with the same strings our parents' money did: expectations, judgments, and the unspoken requirement that I become more like her. I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, looking back at the sprawling colonial mansion that had never really felt like home despite the 18 years I'd lived there. Little did I know that the next time I walked through that door, the house would be mine. 3 days later, I sat in the cramped office of Rafael Mendez, the brilliant but unconventional architect I'd been working under for the past 2 years. The space was chaotic. Models of buildings competed for space with stacks of plans and material samples, but there was an energy here that the sterile perfection of my parents' world could never match. "They cut you off?" Rafael asked, leaning back in his chair, his dark eyes studying me with concern. "Completely?" I nodded, turning my coffee cup in circles on his cluttered desk. Except for a parting gift that wouldn't even cover one semester's tuition. At 42, Rafael had become more than just my boss. He was the mentor I'd never had, someone who saw potential in my unconventional designs instead of flaws, who pushed me to take creative risks instead of seeking safer paths. The son of Brazilian immigrants, he'd built his firm from nothing, winning awards for his innovative approach to urban housing problems. His reality was as far from my parents' old money world as it was possible to get. "And the Paris program starts in January," he confirmed, pulling up my acceptance letter on his tablet. 8 weeks from now," I said, the reality of my situation hitting me anew. "I've saved about 60,000, but I'm still more than 100, short for the full program." Rafael set down his tablet, his expression thoughtful. "Your vertical gardens project, the one that got you accepted, what would you say was the core principle behind it?" I blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "Adaptability," I answered automatically. "Creating sustainable living spaces that adapt to both environmental conditions and human needs." "Adaptability," he repeated with a slow nod. "And now life is asking you to adapt. The question is, will you abandon your vision because the path has changed, or will you find a new path to the same destination?" "That's poetic, Rafa. But poetry doesn't pay international tuition," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "No, but this might." He slid a file across the desk to me. "The Riverside Renewal Project. The city contract I've been pursuing for 2 years. We got it." I stared at him, my heart racing. The Riverside project was massive, converting an abandoned industrial waterfront into mixed-income housing with integrated green spaces. Our firm had been competing against architectural giants with hundreds of employees and decades of prestige. How? I breathed, flipping through the preliminary approval documents. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Your designs? Raphael said simply. The vertical garden concept you adapted for the riverside environment. The committee was impressed by the innovation, the sustainability metrics, and, he smiled, the fact that it came in significantly under budget. Pride flickered through me, quickly followed by confusion. But what does this have to do with Paris? I need a project manager, Raphael said. Someone who understands the vision intimately because they helped create it. The position comes with a substantial salary increase and a performance bonus structure. 3 months of dedicated work could potentially earn you enough to cover your first year's tuition. I shook my head in disbelief. You're offering me a promotion? Now? When I'm planning to leave? I'm offering you a bridge, he corrected. A way to get from where you are to where you want to be. You'd need to postpone Paris by 1 semester, but you'd go with your financial independence intact. Why would you do this for me? I asked, overwhelmed by his generosity. Raphael's expression grew serious. Because 10 years ago, I was you. Talented, but without resources or connections. Someone took a chance on me. Now I'm taking a chance on you. He paused. Also, frankly, your parents' investment strategy has been the subject of some concerning rumors in financial circles lately. That caught me by surprise. What do you mean? It's probably nothing, he said, waving dismissively. Industry gossip. The point is, true security doesn't come from family money or connections. It comes from creating value that others recognize and reward. As I left Raphael's office with a new contract and position, a strange feeling settled over me, a mixture of determination and something else I couldn't quite name. For the first time, I felt like I was stepping onto a path that was truly mine, not defined by comparison to Victoria or by my parents' expectations. Little did I know that while I was signing my new employment contract, my father was making the investment mistake that would unravel their carefully constructed world. The next 6 weeks were a blur of 18-hour workdays, takeout dinners at my drafting table, and the exhilarating challenge of bringing the Riverside project from concept to executable plans. I'd moved out of my Brooklyn studio into an even smaller place in Queens to cut expenses, selling most of my furniture and living with the Spartan focus of someone with a clear mission. Victoria called repeatedly, leaving increasingly concerned. Voicemails about family dinners I was missing and holiday plans I wasn't participating in. I ignored them all, channeling every ounce of energy into my work. For once in my life, I wasn't dividing my attention between my own goals and the exhausting effort of trying to earn my parents' approval. You need to sleep occasionally, Raphael remarked one night, finding me still at my workstation at 2 a.m., surrounded by 3D models and material samples. Brilliance requires rest, Olivia. I'll rest when I've earned Paris, I replied, not looking up from my calculations. You've already earned it, he said quietly. The acceptance letter proved that. This isn't about proving yourself anymore, but it was. Every hour I worked was a silent rebuttal to my father's dismissal, to my mother's condescension, to a lifetime of being the family disappointment. With each revised drawing and each solved problem, I was rebuilding not just a Riverside community, but my own sense of worth. The first hint that something was wrong in my parents' world came 7 weeks after they cut me off. I was presenting our final designs to the City Planning Commission when Victoria appeared at the back of the conference room, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, her expression tense. "What are you doing here?" I asked when the meeting ended with unanimous approval for our project. The commission members were still congratulating Raphael while eyeing me with newfound respect. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," Victoria said, pulling me into a quiet corner. "Something's happening with Mom and Dad. Dad's investment firm is under investigation. There are rumors about mismanagement of client funds. And this concerns me, how?" I interrupted, still riding the high of my professional success. They made it very clear I'm on my own now. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand gripped my arm. Liv, this is serious. They've started selling assets. The Southampton house is on the market. That stopped me cold. The Southampton house had been in our family for 4 generations. My father had always said it would pass to Victoria and me someday. A piece of Lancaster legacy that would remain even if everything else changed. They're probably just downsizing, I said. But uncertainty crept into my voice. They're in trouble, Victoria insisted. Real trouble. Dad won't tell me details, but I overheard him telling Mom they might need to liquidate everything just to cover the legal fees. A strange emotion flickered through me. Not satisfaction exactly, but something adjacent to it. The parents who had judged my financial planning and career choices were facing their own economic crisis. Again, why should I care? I asked, gathering my presentation materials. They cut me off, remember? Made it very clear that my financial decisions weren't their concern anymore. Because they're still our parents, Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. And for all their flaws, they don't deserve what's happening. I looked at my sister, perfect, successful Victoria, and saw real fear in her eyes. For the first time since we were children, she looked uncertain, as if the script she'd been following all her life had suddenly been rewritten. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked. Just check on them, she pleaded. I've tried, but Dad won't talk to me about it. He still respects your mind, Liv. You've always understood financial structures better than I have. I almost laughed at the irony. After a lifetime of being compared unfavorably to Victoria, she was now suggesting I had insights she lacked. I'll think about it, I said non-committally, watching Raphael motion for me to join him and several commission members for the celebratory lunch we'd planned. Victoria nodded, relief visible on her face. That's all I'm asking. And Liv, she hesitated. The project looks amazing. You're really good at this. The compliment, so unexpected from the sister who had always outshone me, left me momentarily speechless. I managed a nod before turning away, unwilling to let her see how much her words affected me. That evening, against my better judgment, I drove to my parents' Manhattan apartment. The doorman, who had known me since childhood, gave me a sympathetic look as I entered the lobby. They're upstairs, Miss Lancaster, he said quietly. Been having a lot of meetings with serious-looking people lately. I took the private elevator to the penthouse, a knot forming in my stomach with each ascending floor. When the doors opened, directly into the apartment foyer, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. Dozens of boxes stacked along the normally pristine walls, paintings missing from their usual places, leaving lighter rectangles on the expensive wallpaper. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the half-empty space. My mother appeared from the direction of the kitchen, freezing when she saw me. She looked thinner, her usual perfect appearance slightly frayed around the edges. For a moment, something like shame crossed her face before her familiar mask of composure slipped back into place. Olivia, she said, her voice carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Victoria said you might be having some difficulties, I replied, deliberately using the euphemistic language my parents had always employed when discussing unpleasant realities. My mother's laugh held no humor. That's one way to put it. Your father's in his study. I'm sure he'll be delighted by your concern. The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. I made my way through the apartment, noting other signs of hasty packing and valuable items conspicuously missing. My father's study door was open, revealing him surrounded by papers, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from what I suspected was lack of sleep. He looked up as I entered, and for a brief moment, I saw naked vulnerability in his expression before he composed himself. Come to survey the wreckage? He asked, his attempt at his usual authoritative tone falling flat. Victoria seemed concerned, I said, remaining in the doorway. She thought I might be able to help. Unless you have $20 million to cover a margin call, I doubt it, he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. Or better yet, a time machine so I could undo some spectacularly poor decisions. 20 million. The figure hung in the air between us, its enormity making my recent financial concerns seem trivial by comparison. What happened? I asked, stepping fully into the room now. My father's laugh was hollow, hubris, overconfidence, the classic downfall of men my age who think they've outsmarted the market for so long that they're invincible. He gestured to the papers on his desk. Leveraged investments that looked brilliant 6 months ago. Now, they're worth pennies on the dollar, and the loans I took out against them are being called in. I moved closer, glancing at the documents. Years of studying architectural budgets and project financials had given me a solid understanding of numbers. What I saw made my stomach drop. Everything's secured against personal assets, I noted, the implications dawning on me. The apartments, the Southampton house, all of it, my father confirmed. We're selling everything that isn't nailed down. But it won't be enough. The Southampton house goes to auction in 3 weeks. An auction, not even a dignified private sale, but a public liquidation of the family showpiece. The ultimate humiliation in their social circle. I thought Victoria should know what's coming, he continued, his voice flat. The family name is about to become synonymous with financial disgrace. It might affect her standing at her firm. I noticed he didn't express similar concerns about how it might affect me. In his mind, I had no professional reputation worth protecting. And you? I asked. What happens to you and Mom? He shrugged, the gesture so uncharacteristic it was jarring. We downsize, dramatically. Your mother's sister has a guest house in Connecticut. We'll start there while I sort through the legal implications. The great Richard Lancaster, reduced to living in his sister-in-law's guest house. The man who had lectured me endlessly about financial responsibility was facing bankruptcy. The father who had cut me off for my impractical career choices had gambled away a family fortune on risky investments. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger, pity, and an unexpected protectiveness. For all their flaws, these broken people were my parents. I need to go, I said, backing toward the door, suddenly needing air that wasn't heavy with failure and regret. My father nodded absently, already returning to his papers. Probably for the best. Nothing to be done now anyway. As I reached the door, he called after me. Olivia? I turned back. That architectural program you mentioned. Did you find a way to make it work? The question surprised me. I'm getting there, I answered honestly. I took on a major project. If it goes well, I'll have enough for the first year's tuition. Something like pride flickered across his exhausted face. Good. That's good. He hesitated. Sometimes we find our greatest strengths when everything else is stripped away. It was the closest thing to a compliment, or an apology, that he'd offered in years. I nodded once and left, my mind already racing with possibilities I wouldn't have dared consider 3 hours earlier. The next morning, I walked into Raphael's office without an appointment, a proposal in hand that would either strike him as brilliant or insane. I need an advance on my project completion bonus, I said without preamble. A significant one. Raphael looked up from his computer, startled. Good morning to you too, Olivia. Coffee? Water? Basic social pleasantries? Sorry, I said, taking a breath to collect myself. Good morning. My parents are bankrupt. Their house is going to auction in 3 weeks. I want to buy it. Raphael stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he started to laugh. Of all the responses to being cut off financially, this might be the most dramatically, satisfying I've ever heard. His laughter faded as he studied my face. You're serious? Completely, I confirmed, sliding my proposal across his desk. The property's market value is around $8 million, but distressed auctions typically close at 50–60% of value. With the current real estate downturn and the speed of the sale, I'm estimating it will go for around $4 million. And you want me to give you $4 million, Raphael said slowly. No, I corrected. I want you to advance me $200,000 against my bonus. I've located an investor willing to finance the purchase if I can cover the deposit and closing costs. Once I own it, I'll implement the adaptive reuse plan detailed on page 3. Raphael flipped to the indicated page, his eyebrows rising as he reviewed my designs. I had stayed up all night creating them. Plans to convert the sprawling, energy-inefficient mansion into 4 luxury apartments and a shared creative workspace, using sustainable materials and incorporating many of the same innovative elements that had made our Riverside project successful. The projected ROI is impressive, he acknowledged, but this is personal, Olivia. Investing in family situations rarely ends well. It's not about family, I insisted. It's about opportunity. That property has 7 acres of prime Southampton. Real estate with unobstructed water views. The structure is solid, just inefficient and outdated. With the renovations I'm proposing, the return would be substantial. Raphael studied me for a long moment. And the fact that it's your family home, the place your parents are about to lose in a very public, very humiliating auction, that's just coincidence? I met his gaze steadily. It's a factor in my motivation, but not in the business case. The numbers work, Rafa. You know they do. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Who's your investor? Elena Vasquez, I said, naming a successful tech entrepreneur who had been vocal about wanting to diversify into real estate. She's been looking for the right opportunity to enter the luxury market. I approached her yesterday with my proposal. Elena's smart money, Raphael admitted. If she's interested, the concept has merit. He tapped my proposal thoughtfully. But there's a piece missing from this plan. Which is? Your parents, he said simply. Have you considered their reaction when they discover their daughter now owns the home they lost? I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. My focus had been entirely on the practical aspects, securing financing, planning renovations, calculating returns. They cut me off, I said, my voice harder than I intended. They made it clear my financial decisions were no longer their concern. By the same logic, theirs are no longer mine. And yet here you are, restructuring your entire financial future around their property, Raphael observed mildly. I fell silent, unable to articulate the complex tangle of emotions driving me. Was this about proving something to my parents? Saving them from public humiliation? Or was it truly just a good business opportunity that happened to involve a property I knew intimately? I need to do this, I said finally. Whether it's about business or family or both, I need to see it through. Raphael nodded slowly, seeming to recognize the determination in my voice. $200,000 is a substantial advance, he said, far beyond what I'd normally consider. My heart sank. I understand. It was worth asking. But, he continued, holding up a hand to stop me, I might be open to a different arrangement. What would you say to a partnership? The firm puts up the capital you need. In return, we become development partners on the renovation, with a 30% stake in the completed property. I stared at him, processing the offer. You'd want to be involved in the actual renovation? It aligns with our expanded focus on sustainable luxury conversions, he said, warming to the idea. Plus, the publicity value of transforming an old money estate into a model of modern, eco-conscious design. That's marketing we couldn't buy. It wasn't what I had planned, but it made sense. Raphael's firm had resources and connections I lacked, and his involvement would lend credibility to the project. Partners, I agreed, extending my hand across the desk. As Raphael shook it, sealing our agreement, he fixed me with a serious look. One condition, Olivia. When the time comes to face your parents about this, and it will come, you need to be clear about your intentions, with them and with yourself. I nodded, pushing aside the emotional complexities his words evoked. There would be time to sort through my feelings later. Right now, I had an auction to prepare for, a house to buy, and a point to prove, though exactly what point and to whom I wasn't entirely sure. What I did know was that in 3 short weeks, the dynamic between my parents and me would be irrevocably changed. The question was whether what rose from the ashes of our old relationship would be better or simply different. What I couldn't have predicted was just how dramatically that auction day would unfold, or how it would force all of us to confront truths we'd spent decades avoiding. The Southampton estate looked different in the harsh December light, more vulnerable somehow. As I walked the perimeter with Elena Vasquez, my investor, snow crunched beneath our boots, and the Atlantic wind cut through my coat with surgical precision. The house stood silent, many of its windows already dark, as if the building itself understood its impending fate. 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, direct beach access, and that boathouse could be converted into an amazing studio space, I explained, gesturing toward the property's various features while trying to ignore the Christmas decorations still visible through some windows. My mother had always decorated obsessively for the holidays, as if perfect garlands and color-coordinated ornaments could create the family warmth we actually lacked. Elena, a tech executive who'd made her fortune developing privacy software, studied the property with calculating eyes. At 45, she'd built an empire from nothing, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who'd cleaned houses in neighborhoods like this one. Now, she was considering buying one as an investment. The structure looks solid, she observed, making notes on her tablet. Pre-auction inspection reports? All clear, I confirmed. Foundation is excellent. Roof was replaced 5 years ago. The issues are entirely cosmetic and efficiency-based. The heating system is ancient, the layout unnecessarily compartmentalized. And your parents have no idea you're planning to bid? Elena asked, her direct gaze cutting through my professional facade. I hesitated. They know the house is going to auction. They don't know I'm involved. Elena nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. The partnership structure with your firm covers the deposit and closing costs. My financing handles the purchase. The renovation costs will be split according to the ownership percentages. And your compensation? I waive my design fees in exchange for a 25% equity stake, I replied, the arrangement we'd hammered out over the past week. Raphael's firm gets 30%, you retain 45%. Elena studied me, her expression unreadable. Most architects would charge hundreds of thousands for a project of this scale. You're essentially working for free. I'm working for ownership, I corrected, and for the opportunity to create something meaningful from... I gestured toward the house, struggling to find the right words. From the ruins of your family legacy? Elena suggested, her tone not unkind. I looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. Something like that? Elena closed her tablet case with a decisive snap. I've seen enough. The numbers work. Your designs are innovative. Let's proceed. She extended her hand and we shook on it, finalizing an agreement that would irrevocably change my relationship with my family, whatever remained of it. As Elena walked back to her waiting car, she paused. Ms. Lancaster? A piece of advice from someone who's been where you are. Where's that? I asked, standing in the shadow of a family that couldn't see your value. Her smile was small but genuine. When you're bidding at that auction, remember, you're not buying their house, you're buying your freedom. As her car pulled away, I stood alone on the snow-covered lawn, looking up at the house that had never truly felt like home, despite the years I'd lived there. In 10 days, it would belong to someone else. If everything went according to plan, that someone would be me. The week before the auction unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. By day, I managed the Riverside project, ensuring our team met every milestone. By night, I refined my renovation plans for the Southampton property, creating detailed specifications that would allow us to move quickly after acquisition. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The Paris program had granted me a deferral to the fall semester after I'd explained my circumstances, not the family drama, but the professional opportunity the Riverside project represented. 3 days. Before the auction, Raphael caught me falling asleep at my drafting table at 2 a.m. "This is intervention time," he announced, closing my laptop despite my protests. "You haven't left the office in 36 hours. You've been wearing the same clothes since Tuesday. Even creative geniuses need to shower occasionally." "I'm fine," I insisted, fighting a yawn that undermined my claim. "The presentation for the zoning commission is tomorrow, and I need to finalize the auction strategy for the house auction. Yes, I know," Raphael interrupted. "The auction that you're approaching with all the emotional preparation of someone buying a toaster." He perched on the edge of my desk, his expression serious. "Olivia, have you spoken to your parents at all?" I looked away. "There's nothing to say until after the auction." "So they'll just show up and discover their daughter is the new owner of their former home? That's your plan?" Put that way, it did sound callous. But the alternative, warning them in advance, seemed equally problematic. What could I possibly say? "Sorry you lost everything, but don't worry, I'm swooping in to buy your house out from under you. Surprise!" "They cut me off," I said, falling back on the justification that had become my mantra. "They made it clear I was on my own." "And yet, they're still living rent-free in your head," Raphael observed. "You've restructured your entire life around this auction, postponed Paris, leveraged yourself financially, worked to exhaustion. For what? A good investment opportunity? Or something else?" I had no answer that didn't expose the tangled mess of emotions I'd been avoiding. "Go home," Raphael said gently. "Get some sleep. Call your sister. Do something that acknowledges the human dimension of what you're about to do." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion made honesty easier. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "Not of the auction, or the financial risk. I'm afraid of what happens after, when they know." Raphael nodded. "That's the first sensible thing you've said about this whole situation." I gathered my things, too tired to continue pretending this was just business. "What? If I'm making a terrible mistake?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been hovering at the edges of my determination. "Maybe you are," Raphael shrugged. "But it's your mistake to make. That's what independence really means. The freedom to succeed or fail on your own terms." As I walked to the subway, I finally called Victoria. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Liv, where have you been? I've left you a dozen messages." "Working," I said simply. "How are Mom and Dad?" Victoria's sigh carried the weight of weeks of stress. "Moving into Aunt Catherine's guest house tomorrow. Most of their things are in storage or sold. Dad's barely speaking. Mom's pretending it's all some grand adventure in downsizing." The familiar family patterns, my father retreating into silence when faced with failure, my mother constructing elaborate fictions to maintain appearances. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. "Are they going to the auction?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. "God, no," Victoria said. "Dad says he couldn't bear it. The house has been in his family since 1952. To watch strangers bid on it would be too much." Relief and disappointment warred within me. Relief that I wouldn't have to face them when I placed my bid. Disappointment that they wouldn't witness the moment when I took control of something they thought was lost forever. "I might go," Victoria continued. Just to see what happens. Mom left some family photos in a hidden wall safe. If the new owners are there, I thought I might ask if I could retrieve them. My stomach twisted. Those photos would be mine to return, not beg for. Another complication I hadn't anticipated. Don't, I said quickly. I mean, it might be better to contact the new owners afterward, through their agent. Maybe you're right, Victoria conceded. It's all so surreal, Liv. 3 months ago, our biggest family drama was whether you'd make it to Mom's birthday dinner. Now they're living in a guest house, and our childhood home is being auctioned off. The contrast wasn't lost on me. The same day my parents had cut me off, the day I'd stood in my father's study being told I needed to learn the value of money, had been the beginning of their own financial unraveling. We'd both been standing on the edge of a cliff, neither of us aware of what was coming. Life changes fast, I said, inadequately. Too fast, Victoria agreed. Then, with characteristic directness, I miss you, Liv. I know things have always been complicated between us, with Mom and Dad playing favorites. But you're still my sister. Her words caught me off guard. Victoria and I had never openly acknowledged our parents' unequal treatment. It had been the elephant in every room of our childhood, visible to both of us but never discussed. I miss you too, I admitted. After the auction, maybe we could get coffee? Talk about things? I'd like that, she said, the relief in her voice palpable. Just promise me one thing? What's that? Whatever you're working on that's keeping you so busy, don't let it consume you the way Dad let his work consume him. Some things are more important than success. The irony of her words, given what I was planning, was almost too much to bear. I'll try, I promised, knowing I was already breaking that promise. Auction day dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crystalline winter light that seems to strip everything down to its essence. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, professional but understated. The last thing I wanted was to draw attention to myself. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about executing a plan. The auction was being held at a luxury hotel in downtown Southampton, a strategic choice to attract wealthy bidders looking for a bargain. I arrived early, registering under my company's name rather than my own, a small deception that would delay, but not prevent, the inevitable discovery of my identity. The ballroom filled gradually with prospective buyers, most of them developers, or representatives of real estate investment groups. I recognized several prominent builders who specialized in tearing down older homes to build modern monstrosities. The thought of my childhood home being razed made my resolve stronger. Whatever. My complicated feelings about the place. Nervous? Raphael asked, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee. He'd insisted on attending despite my protests that I could handle this alone. No, I lied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Just focused. He hummed skeptically. And the fact that you've shredded your auction paddle into confetti is just, what? A bold artistic statement? I looked down at the numbered paddle in my hands, now partially destroyed by my unconscious fidgeting. Damn it, I muttered, smoothing it as best I could. It's okay to be human about this, you know, Raphael said quietly. You're buying your parents' house out from under them. That's bound to stir up some feelings. I'm rescuing it, I corrected, saving it from being demolished and replaced with some soulless modern box. Raphael gave me a look that said he wasn't buying my rationalization, but before he could respond, a familiar voice caught my attention. Olivia? What are you doing here? I turned to find Victoria staring at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion. She looked exhausted, the strain of recent weeks evident in the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. I could ask you same thing, I replied, buying time to collect myself. You said you weren't coming. I changed my mind, she said. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers treating our home like a commodity. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my formal attire, the auction paddle in my hand. But you're not just here to watch, are you? The moment I'd been dreading had arrived, just not in the way I'd anticipated. I'd prepared myself to explain to my parents after the fact. I hadn't expected to justify myself to Victoria beforehand. I'm planning to bid, I admitted, seeing no point in lying. Victoria stared at me, disbelief giving way to understanding. That's why you've been so distant. You're buying the house. It wasn't a question. I'm trying to, I corrected. With partners, it's a business decision. A business decision, she repeated, her tone making it clear she didn't believe me. Our family home is being auctioned off because Dad made catastrophic financial mistakes. And your response is to, what? Swoop in and capitalize on their misfortune? Put that way, it sounded terrible, but it wasn't that simple. That's not fair, I protested. I'm planning to save it, renovate it, turn it into something sustainable and beautiful. Does that matter? Victoria demanded, her voice rising slightly. Mom and Dad are living in Aunt Catherine's guest house. They've lost everything. And their daughter shows up at the auction to buy their home as an investment property? Do you have any idea how that will make them feel? I flinched at her words, but before I could respond, the auctioneer called for everyone to take their seats. The auction was about to begin. We need to talk about this, Victoria hissed, grabbing my arm as I turned toward the seating area. After, I promised, extracting myself from her grip. Whatever happens, we'll talk after. I took my seat beside Raphael, acutely aware of Victoria's eyes boring into the back of my head from several rows behind. My carefully constructed narrative about this being a straightforward business opportunity was crumbling in the face of her reaction. If Victoria saw it as a betrayal, how would my parents feel? The auctioneer, a silver-haired man with the polished charm of someone who regularly separated wealthy people from their money, began his opening remarks. He spoke about the property's desirable location, its historical significance, its potential for renovation or redevelopment. Each word felt like a diminishment of the place where I'd grown up, reducing family history to selling points. We'll begin the bidding at $3 million, he announced. Do I have $3 million? A paddle went up across the room. A representative from Coastal Developments, a company known for building oversized luxury homes with little regard for architectural integrity or environmental impact. I have $3 million. Do I have 3.2? Another paddle rose, this one belonging to a private investor I didn't recognize. 3.2 million. Do I have 3.4? My heart raced as the bidding continued, quickly surpassing the 3.5 million Elena and I had calculated as a likely selling price. 4 million. 4.2. 4.5. The Coastal Developments representative and the private investor were locked in a bidding war, each determined to secure the property. 5 million, the auctioneer called. Do I have 5.2? This was well beyond what we'd prepared for. I glanced at Raphael, who shook his head slightly. We had agreed on a maximum bid of 5 million. Anything beyond that would make the renovation financially unsustainable. The coastal representative raised his paddle. 5.2 million. 5.2 million, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I have 5.4? The private investor hesitated, then shook his head. He was out. 5.2 million going once. I felt frozen, watching my carefully constructed plan collapse. At this price, the property was beyond my reach. The house would go to Coastal, who would almost certainly tear it down. 5.2 million going twice. Raphael leaned close. It's your call, Olivia, but at this price, the numbers don't work. 5.6, I called out, raising my paddle before I could reconsider. A murmur went through the room. The auctioneer looked surprised but recovered quickly. 5.6 million from bidder number 27. Do I have 5.8? The coastal representative conferred briefly with someone on his phone, then raised his paddle again. 5.8. 6 million, I countered immediately, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Raphael gripped my arm. Olivia, what are you doing? We don't have financing for this. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on the coastal representative. This wasn't about business anymore. It wasn't even about proving something to my parents. It was about protecting something that, despite everything, mattered to me. 6 million, the auctioneer repeated. Do I have 6.2? The coastal representative shook his head after another brief phone consultation. He was out. 6 million going once, going twice. The room seemed to hold its breath. This was it, the point of no return. Sold for $6 million to bidder number 27. A smattering of applause broke out as I slowly lowered my paddle. I had done it. I had bought my parents' house. But at what cost? Raphael was staring at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. Please tell me you have a plan for where we're going to find an additional $1 million. I didn't. I had just committed to spending far more than we had secured financing for, driven by an emotional impulse I hadn't anticipated. The victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the financial reality of what I'd just done. Before I could respond to Raphael, Victoria appeared beside us, her expression unreadable. $6 million, she said flatly. That's significantly above market value. I'm aware, I replied, still processing the implications myself. You outbid a major development company, she continued, to buy our parents' house, with money you supposedly don't have, since you needed their help for tuition just 3 months ago. Put that way, my actions seemed not just impulsive but possibly deranged. How could I explain that this had started as a business opportunity, but had transformed in the heat of the moment into something far more personal? It's complicated, I managed. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. That might be the understatement of the century. She shook her head. You need to tell them, Liv, before they hear it from someone else. I will, I promised. I just need to figure out everything first. Figure out what? She pressed. How to explain that you secretly bought their house? Or how to pay for it? Both, I thought but didn't say. Ms. Lancaster? A representative from the auction house approached with paperwork. We'll need you to complete the preliminary purchase agreement and provide the deposit. Victoria's eyes widened at the use of my name. You registered as yourself? Not even through a company? It's a partnership, I explained weakly, with Raphael's firm and an investor. Victoria studied me for a long moment. You know what the strangest part is? I'm not even sure if what you've done is an act of revenge or some misguided attempt to save them. She gathered her coat. Either way, they deserve to hear it from you, not from Southampton gossip. As she walked away, Raphael placed a hand on my shoulder. She's right, you know. And we have bigger problems than family drama at the moment. We need to find another $1 million in financing before the closing in 30 days. The reality of my situation hit me with full force. I had just committed to a purchase I couldn't afford, driven by emotions I still didn't fully understand, and now faced the possibility of losing my deposit and professional credibility if I couldn't secure additional funding. I have an idea, I said slowly, a plan taking shape even as I spoke. But you're not going to like it. Raphael raised an eyebrow. At this point, I'm open to anything short of bank robbery. It's not illegal, I assured him, but it might be the financial equivalent of opening Pandora's box. As we left the auction room to discuss our next steps, I cast one last glance back at the photo of the Southampton house displayed on the screen. For better or worse, it was mine now. The question was whether I had just saved something precious, or made the biggest mistake of my professional life. What I couldn't know then was that the real challenge had less to do with finding the money and more to do with what awaited me at Aunt Catherine's guest house. where I would finally have to face my parents and explain why their daughter was now the owner of their former home. Aunt Catherine's guest house looked like something from a fairy tale. A stone cottage nestled among snow-dusted pines, smoke curling from its chimney into the winter sky. It was charming, quaint, and approximately 1/20th the size of the Southampton mansion. The sight of my father's Mercedes parked beside it, one of the few assets they'd managed to keep, created a jarring visual contradiction. "You don't have to do this today," Raphael said as he pulled his car to a stop behind the Mercedes. He'd insisted on driving me out to Connecticut, concerned about my state of mind after the auction. "The closing isn't for 30 days. You could wait until we've secured the additional financing and let them hear it from someone else?" I shook my head. Victoria's right. They deserve to hear it from me. Raphael studied me for a moment. "Do you want me to come in with you?" The offer was tempting. Having Raphael there would provide a buffer, a professional context that might make the conversation less emotionally charged. But this was family business. Messy, complicated family business. I need to do this alone, I decided. But thank you. For everything. "Just remember," Raphael said as I opened the car door, "we still need to find another $1 million. Before the closing. Try not to burn any bridges you might need to cross later." His words followed me up the stone path to the cottage door. Would I be asking my parents for money? The idea seemed ludicrous after everything that had happened. Then again, 24 hours ago, the idea of spending $6 million on their foreclosed home would have seemed equally absurd. I knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the winter stillness. After a moment, the door opened to reveal my mother. She looked both the same and utterly different. Her hair perfectly styled as always, her cashmere sweater immaculate, but her eyes held a weariness I'd never seen before. "Olivia," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you and Dad," I replied, my rehearsed explanation suddenly inadequate in the face of her obvious exhaustion. "It's important." She hesitated, then stepped back to allow me inside. The cottage interior was cozy but cramped, every surface covered with the few precious items they'd managed to keep from their former life. Silver-framed photos, antique figurines, the small Monet sketch that had hung in our breakfast room. My father sat in an armchair by the fire, a tumbler of scotch in his hand despite the early hour. He looked up as I entered, his expression hardening. "Come to survey our reduced circumstances?" he asked, the familiar edge returning to his voice despite his evident fatigue. "Richard," my mother admonished quietly, "she's our daughter." "A daughter who's been conspicuously absent during our financial collapse," he noted, but the heat had gone out of his words. He just sounded tired. I remained standing, suddenly uncertain how to begin. All my carefully prepared explanations seemed insufficient. "The Southampton house sold at auction today," I finally said. My father's hand tightened around his glass. "We're aware. Our attorney called." "What you may not know," I continued, forcing myself to maintain eye contact, "is who bought it." My mother sank into a chair, something like dread crossing her face. "Oh, Olivia, please don't tell me it was that dreadful coastal development group. They'll tear it down and build one of those hideous modern boxes." "It wasn't coastal," I confirmed. "It was me." Silence fell over the small room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. My father stared at me, his expression unreadable. My mother's hand flew to her throat, a gesture of shock she'd perfected over decades of Southampton dinner parties. "That's not possible," my father said finally. "You don't have that kind of money. We cut you off." "I have partners," I explained. "An investor and Raphael's architectural firm. We plan to renovate it into luxury apartments and a creative workspace. Sustainable, energy efficient, but preserving the historical elements." My father stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the snowy landscape. "You bought our house," he said, his back to me. The house we lost because of my miscalculations. To turn it into apartments. The way he said it made it sound like desecration. I felt a flicker of doubt. Was he right? Was I destroying something precious in the name of progress and profit? It would have been destroyed otherwise, I said. Coastal was the other bidder. They would have demolished it completely. And that makes it better? He asked, turning to face me. That our daughter is the one repurposing our family home for commercial gain? It's not about gain, I protested. It's about preservation through adaptation. The house will still be there, just reimagined. My mother looked between us, her expression thoughtful. How much did you pay? I hesitated. 6 million. 6? My father broke off, staring at me incredulously. The bank evaluated it at 4.5. You overpaid by $1.5 million. I know, I admitted. The bidding got competitive. You let emotion drive a business decision, my father said. And for the first time, there was something like respect in his voice. I didn't think you had it in you. The statement hung in the air between us, layered with meanings I couldn't quite unpack. Was it an acknowledgement that I wasn't the coldly practical daughter they'd always assumed? Or a recognition that I'd made the same kind of mistake that had led to his downfall? Where did you get $6 million? My mother asked, always practical about financial matters. 3 months ago, you were asking us for tuition money. Here was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath. We're actually short on the financing. We have firm commitments for $5 million, but we still need to secure the final $1 million before the closing in 30 days. My father laughed, a sound without humor. So you overbid on a property without confirmed financing? That's not just emotional. It's reckless. His criticism stung, all the more because he was right. I had acted impulsively, driven by competitive instinct and emotions I still didn't fully understand. I'll find the money, I said with more confidence than I felt. Elena Vasquez may increase her investment stake, or Raphael's firm might take on an additional partner. And if those options don't materialize, my father pressed, you'll lose your deposit and your professional credibility. Then I'll figure something else out, I insisted. That's what you taught me to do, isn't it? When you cut me off and told me to stand on my own 2 feet? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. My father flinched, and for a moment, I saw something like recognition in his eyes, as if he was truly seeing me for the first time. So that's what this is about, he said quietly, proving us wrong, showing us you don't need our help or approval. No, I protested, though his words hit uncomfortably close to the truth. It's about saving something important, doing it right instead of letting it be destroyed. My mother set down her teacup with a decisive clink. Whatever your motivations, the fact remains that you now own our former home, but lack the complete financing to pay for it. She looked at my father. Richard, don't you think— No, he interrupted, correctly interpreting her unfinished suggestion. Absolutely not. We still have the trust fund, she continued, undeterred. The one asset the creditors couldn't touch. It was always meant for the girls. My father shook his head. That money is our only safety net, Diana. Our retirement. Our future. I looked between them, confused. What trust fund? Your grandmother's money, my mother explained. A little over $2 million set aside in a protected family trust. It was supposed to be divided between you and Victoria when you turned 35, but with our situation— She trailed off. Delicately. We need it now, my father finished bluntly. To rebuild our lives. I hadn't known about the trust fund. They'd never mentioned it, even when I was struggling to finance my education. The revelation added another layer to the complex web of family secrets and unspoken truths. I'm not asking for the money, I said clearly. I didn't come here for that. I came because you deserve to hear about the house from me, not from gossip or lawyers. My father studied me, his expression softening slightly. Then why are you telling us about your financing shortfall, if not to ask for help? It was a fair question. Why had I revealed that vulnerability? Was I subconsciously seeking their assistance after all? Or was it something else entirely, a need to be honest, to strip away the layers of pretense that had characterized our relationship for so long? Because it's the truth, I said simply. And we've all had enough secrets and half-truths in this family. My mother exchanged a look with my father, some silent communication passing between them. Then she rose and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a thick folder. "Since we're being honest," she said, placing the folder on the coffee table between us, "there's something you should know about the Southampton house. Something that might affect your renovation plans." I opened the folder cautiously. Inside were architectural drawings, original blueprints for the house, but also more recent renderings, dated just 6 months earlier. "What is this?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Our renovation plans," my father explained. "Before everything fell apart, we were planning to completely redesign the house, make it more energy efficient, update the systems, create a modern living space while preserving the historical elements." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's exactly what I'm planning to do, except with multiple units instead of a single residence." "Great minds," my mother said with a small smile. "Or perhaps just the Lancaster stubbornness. Neither of us could stand inefficiency or waste, even in a grand old home." I studied the plans more carefully, noting with growing amazement how similar their vision had been to mine. Solar panels discreetly integrated into the roof design, geothermal heating, strategic reconfiguration of interior spaces to maximize natural light and flow. "You are going to install a living wall in the main hall," I noted, pointing to a detailed drawing. "I have the exact same feature in my design." "It was your mother's idea," my father admitted. "She's been following sustainable design trends for years." I looked at my mother with new eyes. She'd always seemed so conventional, so dedicated to maintaining traditions and appearances. The idea that she had been quietly nurturing progressive design interests paralleled to my own was jarring. "Why didn't I know about any of this?" I asked. My parents exchanged another look, this one tinged with regret. "We weren't exactly encouraging of your architectural interests," my mother acknowledged. "We thought it was another phase, like photography, or interior design before it." "We were wrong," my father added quietly. "These past weeks, seeing your name attached to the Riverside project in the press, recognizing elements of design thinking that mirror our own, it's been enlightening. And humbling," my mother added, "to realize that perhaps what we saw as your lack of focus was actually an integrated approach to design, seeing how different elements could work together." I felt off balance, hearing my parents acknowledge value in my path for the first time. It was what I'd always wanted. But now, it came when I no longer needed their validation, when I'd finally found my own confidence and direction. "These plans might be useful," I said, tapping the folder. "Would you mind if I borrowed them? They could help inform our renovation approach." "They're yours to keep," my father said. "We have no use for them now." The resignation in his voice stirred something unexpected in me, a sense of loss not for the house itself, but for what it represented. A shared vision we might have discovered years earlier if we'd been able to see past our established roles and resentments. "What if there was a third option?" I said suddenly, an idea taking shape as I spoke. Not Coastal's destruction, not my complete reimagining, but something in between. My parents looked at me with cautious interest. "What if we preserved the main house as a single residence?" I continued, "but developed the grounds and outbuildings into the additional units we need to make the numbers work? The boathouse, the carriage house, the guest cottage, they could all become separate luxury residences with shared access to the beachfront. A compound rather than apartments," my father mused, considering the concept. It would preserve more of the historic character and require less interior restructuring, my mother added, potentially reducing renovation costs. I nodded, excitement building as the idea developed. It would mean fewer units, so they'd need to be higher end to reach the same profit margin, but the Southampton market could support that. My father was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You'd still need the additional $1 million to close the purchase, he pointed out. This concept doesn't solve that immediate problem. No, I agreed, but it might open up new partnership opportunities, luxury home developers instead of multi-unit specialists. My mother set down her teacup decisively. Or a different kind of partnership entirely. My father shot her a warning look, which she ignored. Richard, we need to discuss this, she said firmly. Olivia isn't asking for our help, but perhaps we should be offering it anyway. Diana, he began. No, listen, she interrupted. We have the trust fund. What if we used part of it to become investors in Olivia's project, not giving her the money, but investing it, with proper returns and protections? I stared at my mother, astonished by the suggestion. You want to be my business partners, after telling me I was irresponsible for pursuing architecture in the first place? People can change their minds when presented with new evidence, she said with unexpected humility. Your success with the Riverside project, your acceptance to the Paris program, your creative approach to the Southampton property, all of it, suggests we may have misjudged your path. Underestimated, my father corrected quietly. We underestimated you, Olivia. There's a difference. The admission, so long desired and now so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. How many times had I imagined my parents acknowledging my choices, respecting my vision? And now, when I'd finally stopped needing their approval, here it was, offered freely, along with the financial partnership I hadn't dared ask for. It wouldn't be charity, my father continued, warming to the idea despite his initial reluctance. It would be a proper investment with appropriate returns. After all, we do have considerable experience with luxury real estate, regardless of my recent missteps. And intimate knowledge of the property itself, my mother added, including all its quirks and hidden potential. The proposition was both tempting and terrifying. Working with my parents would provide the financing I desperately needed while adding their expertise and local connections. But it would also mean entangling myself with the very people I'd been trying to prove myself independent from. Would it be a step forward or a retreat to old patterns? I would need to discuss it with Raphael and Elena, I said cautiously. They're equal partners in this venture. Of course, my father nodded. We wouldn't expect anything less than proper business protocols. And there would need to be clear boundaries, I added. Professional ones. This wouldn't mean... I trailed off, unsure how to articulate what I meant without sounding harsh. It wouldn't erase the past, my mother finished for me, or magically fix our family dynamics. Exactly, I said, relieved she understood. But it might be a starting point, my father suggested. A way to build something new on the foundation of the old. Isn't that what good architecture is all about? Wendyke. Question struck me as surprisingly insightful from someone who had always dismissed my profession as a hobby. Perhaps my father had been paying more attention than I'd realized. I'll think about it, I promised, rising to leave, and discuss it with my partners. My mother walked me to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Whatever you decide about the investment, I hope you'll keep us informed about the renovation. It would mean a lot to see the house transformed rather than destroyed. I will, I promised. As I stepped outside, she added, Victoria tells me you deferred your acceptance to Paris. I nodded. Just until the fall semester. The Riverside project was too important to leave halfway through. And now the Southampton house, she noted. You're building quite a portfolio before even completing your advanced training. Life doesn't always follow the expected sequence, I said, thinking of how dramatically our family's circumstances had changed in just 3 months. No, she agreed with a sad smile. It certainly doesn't. As I walked back to Raphael's waiting car, I felt strangely lighter despite the complications ahead. The conversation hadn't gone at all as I'd expected. Instead of anger or accusations, my parents had offered understanding and the possibility of a new kind of relationship. Not the unconditional support I'd craved as a child, but something potentially more valuable. Respect between adults, with shared interests and complementary skills. How did it go? Raphael asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Surprisingly well, I admitted, and potentially very complicated. As we drove away from the fairy tale cottage, I gazed back at my parents standing in the doorway, diminished in circumstances but somehow more real to me than they had ever been in their mansion. For the first time, I'd glimpsed the people behind, the parental roles with their own regrets, ambitions, and capacity for change. The Southampton house still stood between us, no longer as a symbol of what I couldn't have, but as a project that might either heal or further fracture our family bonds. Which outcome would prevail remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. Whether those terms would include them as partners in my vision or merely spectators to it was a decision I still needed to make. One that would determine not just the future of a house, but the nature of our family's relationship for years to come. Absolutely not, Elena Vasquez declared, pacing the length of Raphael's conference room with barely contained energy. Family and business never mix well. It's like oil and water, or more accurately, like matches and gasoline. 3 days had passed since my conversation with my parents, and I'd called an emergency meeting with my partners to discuss their unexpected investment offer. Raphael sat at the head of the table, silently observing the debate while sketching idly on his tablet. It solves our financing problem, I pointed out, though Elena's reaction mirrored my own initial doubts. And they know the property intimately. Of course they do. They lost it, Elena countered. You don't think that creates a problematic, emotional attachment? One that could interfere with objective business decisions? She had a point. The same emotional entanglement that had driven me to bid $6 million could affect my parents' judgment as well. Their renovation plans were remarkably similar to ours, I said, sliding the folder of my parents' blueprints across the table. They understand the vision. Raphael picked up the drawings, studying them with professional interest. These are impressive. Your father has a good eye for spatial flow, and these sustainability elements were ahead of their time for a residential renovation. My mother's contributions, apparently, I said, still adjusting to that revelation. Elena stopped pacing and braced her hands on the conference table. Let me be blunt. 3 months ago, these people cut you off financially when you needed support. For your education. Now that you've proven yourself successful without them, they suddenly want to be business partners? Her eyes narrowed. That sounds like opportunism, not reconciliation. Her words hit uncomfortably close to my own unspoken concerns. Were my parents genuinely interested in the project, or merely seizing an opportunity to regain control now that I'd demonstrated success on my own terms? The problem remains, Raphael interjected, setting down the drawings. We need an additional $1 million within 27 days, or we lose the deposit and the property. Elena, you've been clear that you won't increase your investment stake. My firm is already extended to our limit. Unless we find another investor quickly, the Lancaster option might be our only viable solution. Elena crossed her arms. What about your sister, Olivia? Victoria, right? She's a successful attorney. Could she be a potential investor? I shook my head. Victoria's comfortable, but she doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. And I'm not sure I want to complicate another family relationship with business entanglements. Yet you're considering doing exactly that with your parents, Elena pointed. Out. It's different, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. Victoria and I have always been on good terms. There's less to prove. And that's exactly my concern, Elena said, her voice softening slightly. This feels like it's about proving something, not making the best business decision. Raphael had been quiet throughout our exchange, but now he looked up from his tablet. Perhaps there's a middle path, he suggested, turning his screen to reveal a new set of drawings, a modified version of our original design incorporating elements from my parents' plans. A compromise? I asked, studying the renderings. A synthesis, Raphael corrected, taking the best elements from both visions. Instead of converting the main house into multiple units, we preserve it as a single luxury residence as your parents envisioned. But we develop the surrounding properties, the boathouse, carriage house, and grounds, into additional luxury units. The compound concept, I murmured, recognizing the idea I'd mentioned to my parents. Exactly, Raphael nodded. It reduces interior renovation costs while still creating multiple revenue streams, and it preserves more of the property's historical character, which will appeal to the high-end Southampton market. Elena studied the renderings with growing interest. This would qualify for additional historic preservation tax credits and sustainability grants, she noted, potentially reducing our overall capital needs. By how much? I asked. Not enough to eliminate the need for additional investment, Raphael admitted, but enough to potentially structure a more limited partnership with your parents, one with clear boundaries and exit provisions. The revised approach appealed to me on multiple levels. It honored the house's history while adapting it for the future, a physical manifestation of what I hoped might happen with my family relationships as well. I still think it's risky, Elena said, but her tone had shifted from outright rejection to cautious consideration. But if we structure the partnership correctly, with appropriate safeguards, we could make it work, I finished for her. Raphael nodded. I'll have our legal team draft a partnership agreement with clear terms, limited decision-making authority for your parents, focused specifically on the main house renovation. Full autonomy for us on the development of the outbuildings and grounds, and an optional buyout provision, Elena added, so we can end the partnership after construction if necessary. As we worked through the details, I felt a growing sense of possibility. Perhaps this approach, clearly defined boundaries, shared vision but separate responsibilities, could serve as a template not just for our business relationship, but for a new kind of family dynamic as well. There's one more thing we need to consider, Raphael said as we wrapped up our meeting. The Paris program starts in September. That's just 7 months away. This renovation will take at least 12 to 18 months of active oversight. The timing conflict had been lurking in the back of my mind, but I'd been avoiding confronting it directly. The Paris program had been my dream for years, the reason I'd approached my parents for financial help in the first place, setting this entire chain of events in motion. I can defer for another semester, I suggested without much conviction. Or maybe even a year. Or, Raphael said, you could consider a more flexible educational approach. The dean of the Paris program is an old colleague of mine. He might be open to a hybrid arrangement, part-time study combined with practical application through the Southampton project. It would take longer to complete the degree, but the real-world experience could be invaluable. The suggestion took me by surprise. I'd always seen my education and career as sequential steps, not parallel paths. But then, everything about the past 3 months had upended my expectations of how life should unfold. I'll think about it, I promised, gathering my things. First, let's secure the partnership agreement and close on the property. Then I can figure out how Paris fits into the new plan. As I left the meeting, my phone chimed with a text from Victoria. Dinner tonight? Just us sisters. We need to talk. The message reminded me that my parents weren't the only family relationship being reshaped by recent events. Victoria had been Caught in the middle of our family's dysfunction for years, playing the role of perfect daughter, while I'd been cast as the disappointment. Now those familiar dynamics were shifting, and we were both adjusting to the change. PM at Lucienne? I texted back, naming a small French bistro in the East Village, where we'd celebrated her law school graduation years earlier. Perfect. See you then. Victoria was already seated when I arrived at the restaurant, a glass of wine in front of her and a second waiting for me. Her professional armor, designer suit, perfect blowout, impeccable makeup, was absent tonight, replaced by jeans, a simple sweater, and hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more like the sister I'd grown up with before. Adult expectations had pushed us onto different paths. "You look exhausted," she observed as I slid into my seat. "Thanks," I replied dryly. "Just what every woman wants to hear." "Sorry," she laughed. "I meant it as a compliment, actually. You look like someone who's doing important work, not someone who's just keeping up appearances." The distinction was meaningful, especially coming from Victoria, who had always excelled at maintaining the image our parents expected. "Mom told me about their investment offer," she said, getting right to the point as she always did. "Are you going to accept it?" I sipped my wine, buying time to organize my thoughts. "We're working on a modified partnership agreement. Limited scope, clear boundaries." Victoria nodded. "Smart. Legal protections are essential, especially with family." She hesitated. "How do you feel about working with them? After everything, it was the question I'd been asking myself since leaving the cottage in Connecticut. "Conflicted," I admitted. "Part of me sees it as a pragmatic business solution. Another part worries it's a step backward, back into the family pattern where my decisions are subject to their approval." "But you're the one with the power now," Victoria pointed out. "You own the property. You're the primary architect. They're minority investors in your vision." She was right, and yet the concern lingered. Old family dynamics had a way of reasserting themselves, even in new contexts. "What about you?" I asked. "How do you feel about all this? It's your family home, too." Victoria twirled the stem of her wineglass thoughtfully. "Honestly, I'm relieved it's in your hands and not some developer's. I never had your attachment to the physical space, but I hated the thought of it being erased completely." Her answer surprised me. "I always thought you loved that house." I loved what it represented: stability, success, family legacy. But the house itself? She shrugged. "Too many rooms nobody used, too much wasted space, too many formal occasions where everyone was performing rather than connecting." It was the most critical I'd ever heard Victoria be about our family's lifestyle. She had always seemed like a perfect fit for the world our parents had created, while I had been the perpetual misfit. "You never said anything," I noted. "Neither did you," she countered with a small smile. "We both played our assigned roles. You as the rebel who challenged everything, me as the good daughter who accepted it all without question." "And now?" I asked. Victoria's expression turned reflective. "Now I'm wondering if those roles served either of us well. You got freedom, but at the cost of support. I got approval, but gave up parts of myself to earn it." She laughed softly. "Listen to me. 6 sessions with a therapist and suddenly I'm full of insights." "You're seeing a therapist?" This was news. Victoria had always prided herself on handling everything independently. "Since Dad's financial collapse," she confirmed. "It's been clarifying, making me reconsider a lot of what I thought was fixed and unchangeable. Like my architectural vision for the Southampton house, Victoria was finding ways to adapt while preserving the essential elements of her identity. The parallel gave me hope that perhaps our entire family might be capable of similar transformation, honoring our connections while creating healthier patterns. "They really underestimated you," Victoria said after a comfortable silence. "I never did, though." Even when we were kids, I knew you saw things differently. Not wrong, just through a completely different lens. It used to drive me crazy because I could never predict what you'd do next. And now? Now I think that's your superpower, she said simply. You see possibilities others miss. It's what makes you a great architect. Her words echoed Raphael's assessment from years earlier, when he'd first taken me under his wing. But coming from Victoria, they carried a different weight. The recognition of someone who had known me my entire life and was finally seeing me clearly. I've got a proposition for you, I said, making a decision I hadn't planned on until that moment. Not a financial one, I added quickly. A professional one. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The Southampton renovation will need legal oversight, contract negotiations, permit applications, compliance with historic preservation requirements, environmental certifications. And you want me to handle it? She guessed. If you're interested, I confirmed. You know the property, you understand the local political landscape, and most importantly, I trust your judgment. Victoria studied me for a moment. Is this a pity offer? Because my firm's struggling since Dad's financial scandal touched some of our major clients? I hadn't known that, but it made sense. The ripple effects of financial disgrace typically extended well beyond the individuals directly involved. No, I said honestly. It's a recognition of your expertise, and maybe a way for us to work together as equals instead of rivals. Victoria considered this, then extended her hand across the table. Partners, she said, but I want a formal engagement letter and fair market compensation. No family discounts. I grasped her hand firmly. Agreed. No more blurring professional and personal boundaries. As we shook on our new arrangement, I felt another piece of the future falling into place, not according to some predetermined plan, but in an organic, unexpected pattern that somehow felt right, despite its deviation from what I'd once imagined. 3 weeks later, I stood on the snow-covered lawn of the Southampton estate, watching my breath cloud in the February air. The closing had been completed that morning. The house was officially owned by Lancaster Renewal Partners, the entity we'd created with my parents as minority investors. Tomorrow, construction crews would begin the first phase of renovation, starting with essential updates to the infrastructure systems. Having second thoughts? Raphael asked, joining me on the lawn. He'd driven out from the city for our informal celebration, a small gathering to mark the official beginning of the project. Not second thoughts, I clarified. More like parallel thoughts, holding multiple possibilities in mind simultaneously. Raphael nodded his understanding. The architect's perspective, always seeing what is alongside what could be. Behind us, the patio doors opened, releasing a burst of warmth and conversation. My parents emerged, followed by Victoria and Elena. They made an unlikely group. The conservative former owners, the ambitious attorney, the tech executive turned real estate investor, all united by their connection to me and to this property. The contractors arrive at 7 tomorrow, my father announced, consulting his phone where he'd programmed every detail of the construction schedule. He'd taken to the project management role with unexpected enthusiasm, channeling his financial expertise into budgeting and timeline oversight. And the sustainability consultant is coming on Thursday to finalize the solar panel specifications, my mother added. She had surprised everyone with her detailed knowledge of environmental design practices, revealing a long-standing interest she'd never had the opportunity to explore professionally. As they discussed logistics, I marveled at how quickly new dynamics had established themselves. My father, stripped of his former authority, had discovered a talent for detailed project coordination. My mother, freed from social expectations, was emerging as a knowledgeable advocate for environmentally conscious design. Victoria, no longer in my shadow or my parents' spotlight, was confidently carving out her own essential role. And I was at the center of it all, not as the family disappointment or the rebellious daughter, but as the visionary who had brought these disparate elements together into a coherent whole. The Paris program director sent over the adjusted curriculum, Raphael mentioned quietly. The hybrid model looks promising. 2 intensive residency periods each year, combined with remote coursework and the Southampton project as your practical application. I nodded, still adjusting to this new vision of my education. Not the immersive experience I'd once imagined, but something potentially more valuable. Theory and practice developing in tandem, each informing the other. I think it might actually be better this way, I admitted. More integrated. Like this project, Raphael observed, gesturing toward the house and the people gathered around it. Finding ways to honor the past while building something new. As twilight settled over the property, casting long shadows across the snow, I found myself standing between my parents, looking up at the house that had come full circle, from family home to lost asset to reclaimed project. What had once represented their authority over me now symbolized my autonomy, yet with their participation rather than their absence. It won't be the same house, my mother said softly, as if reading my thoughts. But perhaps it will be better, more useful, more sustainable. More honest, my father added unexpectedly. Built on reality rather than appearances. The observation could have applied equally to the house or to our evolving family relationship. Both were being reconstructed according to new blueprints, ones that acknowledged structural weaknesses while preserving elements worth saving. I found something when we were clearing out the study, my father said, reaching into his coat pocket. I thought you might want it for the project archive. He handed me a faded photograph I'd never seen before, a black and white image of the house taken shortly after its construction in the 1950s. In the foreground stood a young couple beside an architect holding rolled blueprints. Your great-grandparents with the original architect, my father explained. They were considered radical for their time, installing floor-to-ceiling windows for natural light, orienting the house to maximize solar gain in winter. Early sustainability. Pioneers, though no one called it that then. I studied the image, seeing the house through new eyes, not as a symbol of privilege or tradition, but as the product of forward-thinking vision, innovation adapted to the needs and knowledge of its time. Family legend says your great-grandmother sketched the initial design herself, my mother added. The architect refined it, but the concept was hers. Another piece of family history I'd never known. A predecessor who had shared my interests and abilities, whose creativity had been channeled into the very structure I was now reimagining. The revelation created a sense of continuity I hadn't expected to find in this project of transformation. We should incorporate this somehow, I said, still looking at the photograph. A display about the house's evolution through generations, honoring its origins while documenting its adaptation. A house is never really finished, is it? My father mused. Just continuously revised to meet new needs, new understandings. Like a family, Victoria suggested, joining our conversation. Constantly under renovation. The metaphor resonated with all of us, acknowledging both the work involved in maintaining such structures and the value in doing so, the recognition that some foundations are worth building upon, even when the visible elements need significant updating. As dusk deepened into evening, we moved inside to the great room, the only space we'd furnished before construction began in earnest. Elena had brought champagne, and Raphael produced architectural renderings printed on fine paper, gifts for each stakeholder in the project. To Lancaster renewal, Elena proposed, raising her glass. And to unconventional partnerships. To seeing potential where others see only problems, Raphael added. To adaptation and resilience, my mother offered. To honest foundations, my father said. To sisters who become colleagues, Victoria smiled at me. When my turn came, I looked around at these people who had each, in their different ways, shaped my path to this moment, some by supporting me, others by challenging me, all by forcing. Me to define myself more clearly. To reconstructions, I said finally. Of buildings and relationships. May we build both to last. As our glasses clinked in the warm light, I felt the weight of the past 3 months. The hurt, the struggle, the vindication, the reconciliation, settle into a new configuration. Not erased or forgotten, but integrated into a structure strong enough to build upon. Like the house itself, we had been through a foreclosure of sorts, the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. The outcome remained unwritten, the renovation just beginning. But the blueprints were promising, the foundation solid and the vision clear. Whatever emerged would be neither wholly new nor exactly as it had been before, but something better. A thoughtful adaptation, honoring history while embracing possibility. In architecture as in life, I was learning, the most enduring structures are those that can evolve without collapsing, preserving their essential character while accommodating inevitable change. 3 months ago, my parents had cut me off financially. Today, I owned their foreclosed home. But the real transformation wasn't in the property deed or the bank accounts. It was in recognizing that true independence wasn't about severing connections, but about rebuilding them on more equal, honest terms, creating spaces where everyone could stand on solid ground. 18 months can change everything. The Southampton property emerged from its chrysalis of construction dust and permit applications on a perfect July morning, exactly 70 weeks after our first contractors broke ground. I stood on the curved driveway, clipboard in hand, conducting a final inspection before our official opening reception. The main house gleamed in the summer sunshine, its colonial bones preserved but reinvigorated with modern elements. The new glass conservatory capturing the morning light, the living green wall visible through the entrance hall windows, solar panels integrated seamlessly into the redesigned roof. Around the periphery of the property, where once there had been only underutilized gardens and aging outbuildings, 4 distinct luxury residences now stood in harmonious conversation with the main house, each with its own character, yet contributing to the unified aesthetic of what we now called the Lancaster compound. The landscape crew needs another hour for the meditation garden, Raphael said, joining me on the driveway. Otherwise, we're ready for the photographers at noon. I nodded, making a note on my clipboard, though I didn't really need to. Every detail of this day had been meticulously planned, obsessively reviewed, and repeatedly confirmed. 3 of the II-5 units had already sold to high-profile buyers, exceeding our projected price points by nearly 30%. The remaining 2, the main house and the beachfront cottage, would be featured in Architectural Digest next month, virtually guaranteeing quick sales at premium prices. By any objective measure, the project was a triumph, completed on schedule, and under budget, environmentally certified at the highest level, and already financially successful. Yet as the opening reception approached, I felt strangely unsettled, as if something essential remained unresolved. You seem distracted, Raphael observed, studying me with the perceptiveness that had made him such an effective mentor. Having doubts about tonight's event? Not doubts exactly, I said, struggling to articulate the vague unease. More like an awareness that something is ending. Once those last 2 units sell, our work here is done. The partnership dissolves according to the terms we agreed to. Raphael nodded thoughtfully. Completion is always bittersweet in our profession. We pour ourselves into creating spaces for others to inhabit. Then we move on. But it wasn't just the project completion causing my melancholy. It was the knowledge that this property had served as neutral ground for my family's tentative reconciliation, a shared purpose that had allowed us to rebuild relationships without directly confronting all the unspoken hurts of the past. What would happen to those fragile connections when the common goal disappeared? Your parents are arriving early, by the way, Raphael mentioned as we walked toward the main house. Your father called this morning. He said they have something they want to discuss with you before the reception. My pulse quickened slightly. Despite 18 months of productive collaboration, "We need to talk" still triggered an instinctive wariness where my parents were concerned. Our partnership had functioned remarkably well, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities preventing most potential conflicts. My father had excelled at budget oversight and contractor negotiations, while my mother had surprised everyone with her knowledge of sustainable materials and planting strategies. We had achieved a functional working relationship that occasionally, in unguarded moments, even felt comfortable. But old patterns lingered beneath the surface, emerging in subtle ways. My father's reflexive questioning of some design decisions, my mother's careful monitoring of how various Winchester neighbors responded to the project, my own hypersensitivity to any hint of criticism from either of them. We had created a new framework, but were still, in many ways, the same people with the same ingrained responses to one another. Did they say what they wanted to discuss? I asked, trying to sound casual. Raphael shook his head. Just that it was important and private. He glanced at his watch. They should be here within the hour. I'll handle the final walkthrough with the event planners so you can meet with them. As Raphael headed toward the back gardens where catering staff were setting up for the evening reception, I continued into the main house, running my hand along the restored oak banister of the central staircase. Though the interior had been completely reimagined, walls removed to create flowing space, energy systems modernized, windows enlarged to maximize natural light, we had preserved certain signature elements that anchored the building to its history: the hand-carved staircase, the original fireplace mantels, the library's coffered ceiling. The result was neither museum piece preservation nor radical reinvention, but thoughtful evolution, exactly what I had hoped to achieve. The space honored its past while embracing contemporary needs and values. If only human relationships could be renovated as successfully. I made my way to the third-floor office that had served as our project headquarters throughout construction. Originally, my father's study during my childhood, the room had been transformed into a light-filled workspace with panoramic views of the Atlantic. Today, it would function as a private meeting space before becoming part of the main residence for its new owners. Voices drifted up the stairwell, my parents arriving earlier than expected. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and went down to greet them. They stood in the entrance hall, looking up at the living wall that covered the north interior wall. A vertical garden of native plants that served as both natural air purification system and striking visual anchor for the space. My mother wore a simple linen dress that would have been too casual for her pre-bankruptcy social events, but suited her current lifestyle perfectly. My father, still trim but with significantly more gray in his hair than 18 months ago, had abandoned his former Wall Street uniform of bespoke suits for chinos and an open-collar shirt. "Olivia," my mother said warmly, embracing me with a naturalness that still felt surprising after years of more formal greetings. The final result is even more beautiful than the renderings suggested. The integration of the living wall with the HVAC system is particularly impressive, my father added, his expression conveying genuine appreciation rather than the forced enthusiasm he might once have offered for one of my accomplishments. "Thank you," I said, accepting both compliments, as the professional acknowledgments they were. "Raphael mentioned you wanted to speak with me before the reception?" My parents exchanged a glance, one of those silent communications long-term couples develop that remained opaque to outsiders. "Perhaps we could go somewhere private?" my mother suggested. "The project office upstairs," I offered, leading them up the staircase. Neither had been in the room since its transformation from my father's former study, and I watched closely as they entered the space, curious about their reactions. My father paused in the doorway, his eyes taking in the changes. The walls now painted a soft white instead of the dark wood paneling he'd preferred, the heavy curtains replaced by automated blinds. the built-in bookshelves repurposed as architectural model displays. "You've created something extraordinary here, Olivia," he said finally. "Not just this room, but the entire property. It's a vision I never could have executed, even if our financial situation hadn't changed." The admission, so different from the qualified praise he would have offered in the past, caught me off guard. "The partnership approach worked well," I said carefully. "Everyone contributed valuable perspectives." "Yes, but it was your vision that unified those perspectives," my mother pointed out. "Your ability to see how seemingly conflicting elements could work together harmoniously." She crossed to the windows overlooking the ocean, the same view that had been visible from this room throughout my childhood, but now framed differently by the redesigned space. "That's actually related to what we wanted to discuss with you." My father joined her at the window, and they stood side by side, their postures reflecting both the comfortable familiarity of their decades together and the newfound humility of their reduced circumstances. "As you know, according to our partnership agreement, once the final units sell, Lancaster Renewal Partners will dissolve," my father began. "Each partner will receive their respective share of the profits based on their initial investment and contribution." I nodded, familiar with the terms we had all agreed to. The beachfront cottage and main house should sell quickly after the Architectural Digest feature. We're already fielding serious inquiries. "That's what we wanted to talk about," my mother said, turning to face me. "We've been discussing our next steps once this project concludes." My father cleared his throat. "The trust fund has been significantly replenished through our investment return on this project. Not to its former level, but enough to provide security for our retirement. We've been considering how to allocate those resources most effectively." A familiar tension crept into my shoulders. Were they about to suggest another family financial arrangement? After all the progress we'd made, establishing professional boundaries? "We've decided to establish a foundation," my mother continued, "focused on sustainable architecture and affordable housing initiatives." This was unexpected. Throughout my childhood, my parents' philanthropic efforts had been primarily focused on prestigious cultural institutions, museums, symphony orchestras, private schools that enhanced their social standing while providing valuable tax benefits. "That's a significant departure from your usual interests," I observed. My father smiled slightly. "Our interests have evolved considerably over the past 2 years. Financial disaster has a way of clarifying what truly matters." "Working on this project has been deeply educational," my mother added. "We've seen how thoughtful design can address environmental challenges while creating beautiful, functional spaces. We'd like to apply those principles to housing solutions for people with limited resources." I studied them, trying to reconcile these forward-thinking, socially conscious individuals with the status-obsessed parents I'd grown up with. People could change. I knew that intellectually, but seeing such fundamental shifts in perspective remained disorienting. "The foundation needs a director," my father continued. "Someone with both the technical expertise to evaluate projects and the vision to see possibilities others might miss." The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. "Are you offering me a job?" I asked, uncertain whether to be flattered or concerned about the prospect of continued financial entanglement. "Not a job," my mother corrected. "A partnership of a different kind. We would provide the initial funding and serve on the board of directors, but the foundation's vision and direction would be yours to shape." "With complete creative autonomy," my father emphasized. "Our role would be supportive, not directive." The proposal was tempting in ways I hadn't anticipated. My time at the Paris Architectural Institute, completed last month through the hybrid program Raphael had arranged, had deepened my interest in sustainable urban housing. My thesis project, a modular, adaptable housing system for climate-displaced communities, had received significant attention from both academic and industry publications. But professionally partnering with my parents again, even in this charitable context, raised concerns about falling back into old family dynamics. "What about my own practice?" I asked. "I've had several promising inquiries since my graduation, including 2 potential commercial projects." "The foundation wouldn't be a full-time position, at least initially," my father explained. "You could continue developing your independent practice simultaneously. And if the commercial work becomes all-consuming, the foundation will adapt," my mother added. "We're not looking to limit your opportunities, Olivia. Quite the opposite." I walked to the architectural models displayed on the repurposed bookshelves, miniature versions of the Lancaster compound at various stages of design development. The evolution was visible from initial concept to final execution, each iteration refining and improving upon the last. "Why me?" I asked finally, turning back to face them. "Why not an established architect with more experience in affordable housing?" My parents exchanged another of their communicative glances before my father answered. "Because we trust your judgment," he said simply. "Not just your design sensibility, but your ethical compass. Working with you on this project has shown us that you make decisions based on integrity and long-term thinking, not expedience or ego." My mother nodded. "And because we owe you an ongoing commitment, not just a one-time acknowledgement." I raised an eyebrow. "Owe me?" "For years of underestimating you," she clarified. "For supporting Victoria's path unconditionally while questioning yours at every turn. For failing to recognize that your different approach wasn't defiance or indecision, but a genuine creative process that needed nurturing." My father looked down, then met my eyes directly. "We can't change the past, but we can invest in a future that honors your vision and values in a sustained way." The acknowledgement, more direct than any they had offered previously, touched something deep within me. Not because I still needed their approval, but because it represented genuine growth on their part, a capacity for self-reflection I hadn't believed they possessed. "I'll consider it," I said carefully. "But I'd need to see a formal proposal, governance structure, decision-making protocols, clear boundaries between personal and professional relationships." My father smiled. "We expected nothing less. Victoria has already drafted preliminary foundation documents for your review." She suggested several accountability structures to ensure the foundation's mission couldn't be compromised by family dynamics. The mention of my sister reminded me of how much had changed in that relationship as well. Victoria had resigned from her corporate law firm 6 months ago to establish her own practice focusing on affordable housing and community development. Our professional collaboration on the Lancaster compound had evolved into a genuine friendship and mutual respect that had been missing from our childhood relationship. "I'll review the documents after the reception," I promised, "but I can't make any decisions immediately. I need time to consider how this would fit with my other professional goals." "Of course," my mother nodded. "Take all the time you need. The foundation is intended as a long-term commitment, not a rushed decision." As they turned to leave, my father paused at the door. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. "We wanted you to have this, regardless of your decision, about the foundation." He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was an antique silver key on a simple chain. "It's the original key to this house," my mother explained. "From when it was first built in 1952. We found it in a hidden compartment while clearing out the library before construction began." I turned the key over in my palm, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "I'm not sure I understand." "It's not about ownership anymore," my father said quietly. "You've proven that beyond question. It's about legacy, recognizing that you're the one who preserved what mattered while having the courage to change what needed changing." The key blurred slightly as unexpected tears pricked my eyes. Not from sentimentality about the house itself, but from recognition of how far we had all traveled from that day in my father's study when he'd handed me a check and told me I was on my own. "Thank you," I managed, slipping the chain around my neck. I should finish the final inspection before the photographers arrive. They nodded, understanding my need for a moment of privacy. As they departed, I moved to the window, looking out at the property that had become so much more than a real estate investment or family home. It had become the testing ground for a new kind of relationship, one based not on obligation or authority, but on mutual respect and clear boundaries. I was still standing there when Victoria arrived an hour later, elegant in a summer suit that managed to look both professional and perfectly appropriate for an evening reception. "Contemplating your architectural triumph?" she asked, joining me at the window. "Or having last-minute doubts about selling the crown jewel?" I smiled at her intuitive reading of my mixed emotions. "A bit of both. Mom and Dad were just here." "Ah," Victoria nodded. "The foundation proposal. I should have warned you they were planning to discuss it today." "It's an interesting concept," I acknowledged, though I have questions about the governance structure. "All addressed in the documents," she assured me. "I made sure of it. Complete creative independence for the director position, transparent, decision-making protocols, clear separation between family dynamics and foundation business." I turned to study my sister, still recognizably the poised, competent Victoria I'd grown up with, but now with an authenticity and passion that had been missing during her corporate law years. "They've really changed, haven't they?" I mused. "Or maybe we're just seeing aspects of them that were always there but got buried under social expectations and financial pressure." Victoria considered this. "Perhaps both. Crisis has a way of stripping away pretense. Dad without his fortune, Mom without her social status. They've had to rediscover who they are beneath those identities." "And so have we," I added. "You're not the perfect corporate daughter anymore. I'm not the rebellious disappointment." "We've all been renovated," Victoria agreed with a slight smile. "Structurally sound, but significantly redesigned." The metaphor was apt. Like the house around us, we had preserved our essential foundations while adapting to new realities and possibilities. The change hadn't been easy or painless, but the results were undeniably stronger and more authentic than what had existed before. "I haven't decided about the foundation yet," I said. "I need to consider how it fits with my other plans." "No rush," Victoria assured me. "Though I have to admit, the proposed focus aligns beautifully with your graduate work on adaptable housing for climate-displaced communities. The foundation could provide a platform to develop those concepts at scale." She was right, of course. The opportunity was perfectly aligned with my emerging professional interests, a fact my parents had clearly recognized. Their proposal wasn't an attempt to control my path, but rather to support it based on genuine understanding of my values and vision. "Speaking of other plans," Victoria continued, "have you made a decision about the Paris offer?" The question brought me back to the professional crossroads I'd been avoiding confronting directly. The Paris Architectural Institute had offered me a visiting lecturer position for the fall semester, teaching a course on adaptive reuse of historic properties, a direct result of the attention the Lancaster compound had received in academic circles. "Not yet," I admitted. "It's a prestigious opportunity, but the timing is complicated with the final phase of this project and the new commercial inquiries coming in." "You could do both," Victoria suggested. "The lecturer position is just for one semester, and Paris, in the fall, is spectacular." Before I could respond, Raphael appeared in the doorway. "Photographers are ready for the final walkthrough," he announced, "and the first guests will be arriving in about 2 hours." The conversation about future plans would have to wait. Right now, we had a project completion to celebrate, the successful transformation of a family crisis into a professional triumph, and, perhaps more significantly, the rebuilding of relationships that had once seemed irreparably damaged. As evening fell, the Lancaster compound glowed with strategically placed lighting that highlighted its architectural features. Guests circulated between the main house and the 4 surrounding residences, industry professionals mingling with local officials, potential buyers and media representatives. The reception was exactly the sophisticated celebration we had planned. A showcase not just of luxury properties, but of innovative sustainable design principles applied to historic renovation. Standing on the main house terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens, I found myself between my parents as a photographer from Architectural Digest requested a family photo of the visionaries behind the Lancaster compound. The three principals of Lancaster Renewal Partners, the photographer directed, positioning us against the backdrop of the property. As the camera captured the moment, I was struck by the journey that single image represented, from the day my parents cut me off financially to this evening of shared professional achievement. The photographer couldn't know that he was documenting not just a successful business partnership, but a family's painful, necessary transformation. "I've been thinking about your foundation proposal," I said quietly as the photographer moved on to capture other aspects of the event. My parents turned to me with carefully neutral expressions, clearly trying not to appear too eager or presumptuous. "I'm interested," I continued, "but with one significant modification to the concept." "Which is?" my father asked. "Instead of focusing exclusively on housing, I'd like to expand the mission to include education, specifically mentorship programs for young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds who struggle to find footholds in the architectural profession." My mother nodded thoughtfully. "Supporting not just the buildings, but the people who will design the next generation of spaces. That makes perfect sense. And creates a more comprehensive approach to community transformation," my father added. "Buildings matter, but so do opportunities." Their immediate understanding and support of my modification, without attempting to redirect or question it, confirmed how much our relationship had evolved. This wasn't the conditional approval of my childhood, but genuine professional respect between equals. "I'll need to balance the foundation work with my independent practice," I cautioned, "and possibly with the Paris lectureship if I decide to accept it." "Of course," my father agreed. "The foundation should enhance your professional development, not constrain it." "We trust your judgment about balancing these opportunities," my mother added. "You've demonstrated remarkable capacity for managing complex projects and relationships simultaneously." Their confidence, earned rather than assumed, meant more than they could know. Not because I still needed their approval, but because it represented genuine growth on all our parts. They had learned to appreciate my approach to life and work, while I had learned that people, even parents, could evolve beyond the limitations of past behavior. As the reception continued around us, I fingered the antique key hanging from the chain around my neck. It no longer represented ownership in the conventional sense, but something more nuanced. The understanding that preserving what matters sometimes requires the courage to fundamentally transform it. 18 months ago, my parents had cut me off, financially, triggering a chain of events none of us could have anticipated. The foreclosure of their home had become the foundation for rebuilding not just physical spaces but family bonds. Not as they had been before, with their unhealthy power dynamics and unspoken resentments, but as they could be, respectful, supportive, and grounded in genuine understanding. The Southampton house, like our family, had been saved not by remaining static, but by adapting thoughtfully to new realities. The architectural principle that had guided the renovation, honoring the past while embracing the future, had inadvertently become the blueprint for our family's reconstruction as well. As I moved through the reception, accepting congratulations, and answering questions about design choices and sustainable features, I carried with me the awareness that the most significant transformation wasn't visible in the buildings around us, but in the shifting dynamics between the people who had created them. A family renovated from the foundation up, structurally sound but thoroughly reimagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.